From the Edwin Cardinal O'Brien Pastoral Center in Washington, D.C., home base for the Archdiocese for the Military Services, USA. This is Catholic Military Life, a podcast of the Archdiocese. I'm your moderator, Taylor Henry. And for this episode, a very interesting guest. I'd like to welcome to our microphones Father Stephen Wong of the Archdiocese of Washington and a 40-year U.S. Army veteran. Father Wong, welcome.
Thank you very much.
Now, your story is very unusual in that you are 62 years old.
That's correct.
And you were just ordained this past year.
Yes.
Now, how did you go? And let me preface this by saying you had quite a career in the Army. At one point, you were head of counterintelligence for NATO.
Yeah, that's part of it. Yes, but I had many different titles throughout the years in my military service. So obviously, went from station to station, and the job titles varied. But my last assignment was with NATO.
I hear you. So how did you get from all those stations in the Army to the seminary at the age of late 50s? 56.
Right. Well, that's a very interesting question. Thank you. But it's one that is quite lengthy as well, but I'll try to sum it up for you. Well, I'm originally from Kingston, Jamaica, and I came to the United States in 1979. And there were like 8 of us in a one-bedroom apartment. And so I had to find a way out. So I remember me and my cousins, we were at the mall, and we were kind of like looking at what the clothing of the people were wearing to guess their careers. And I saw this guy in a uniform, and I didn't know. None of my cousins or I knew what he was. So I went up to him and said, "Excuse me, sir, what kind of uniform is that?" And he said, "The United States Army, son." I was like, wow, and I said, "How does one get into the Army?" And he looked at me, and he looked left, and he looked right, and he asked a very silent question. He said, "Are you legal?"
Well,
yeah,
especially nowadays. But anyhow,
absolutely. So I pull out my green card, and I said, "Does this work?" And he's like, "Yeah, we can talk."
Right.
And then next thing you know, 30 days later, I was in the Army.
Wow.
Yeah, and then so because I wasn't a citizen, I literally could not come in with certain MOSs or certain because I couldn't get a clearance, etc. So I served my first 5 years literally as a Cav Scout, and then I was assigned to like different units with the mechanized and armor battalions, and so I did that for 5 years, and I was working towards my undergraduate degree. And then likewise, I got my citizenship. And then things started rolling and unfolding since then. I then decided to reclassify into military intelligence. And then before you knew it, I hit 7 years. I had made E7 in that short period of time. Likewise, I then decided I wanted to be a warrant officer. And it's because I had met a good counterintelligence warrant officer who sort of recruited me into the program, and I got sponsored by him, and next thing you know, I became a warrant officer and started studying and started being exposed to the field itself. And then subsequently, I decided that, well, a lot of officers, especially second lieutenants, were making more money than I was. So I decided to go to OCS. I met all the qualifications and went before the local board as a warrant officer, CW2, and I was accepted. Next thing you know, I was in OCS, Officer Candidate School, and then went for my OBC, Fort Huachuca, Arizona, and then next thing you know, I was a second lieutenant. And as a second lieutenant, it was very unusual that I was assigned to an echelon above corps signal brigade. And that was at Fort Huachuca, Arizona. It was the most deployed brigade in the United States Army inventory. And so I was assigned to them.
And what year was this?
And this would have been, you would test my mind with the timing.
Well, was it before or after 9/11?
So it would have been 1990.
I see.
Right.
A good long time before 9/11.
That's right. And then, but as shortly after I got to the brigade, the Gulf War hit. And 1 week after Saddam Hussein had invaded, my brigade commander came up to me and he said, I need to send an advance party to Saudi Arabia. And I was the one on the advance party.
You drew the short straw.
And I was a second lieutenant at that. Yeah. But he realized that I had all this experience both as enlisted and warrant officer, and then he gave that to me.
Okay, so let me jump in right here. So from 79, you enter the U.S. Army
That's
as an
correct.
enlistee.
That's correct.
And then over the period of 80s and up to 90, you become a commissioned officer.
That's correct.
And then the Gulf War breaks out. You're sent to Saudi Arabia. How
That's
long
correct.
were you there?
I was there for 13 months. So
What was that like?
At first, being in the Middle East was quite a new adventure for me.
That was
but
your first time there?
that was my first time in the Middle East, and I really enjoyed it because it was different. And I like to venture into territories that are unfamiliar.
Lots of good hummus, olives.
Yeah, lots of great food.
Yes.
Yeah, but it was also a time of uncertainties, and thank goodness the war only lasted 100 hours when it really actually started. But we were there for the build-up, and literally, I'm so fortunate that Saddam Hussein decided to give us all that grace period so we could build up our forces. But needless to say that there was still a lot of scuds and a lot of skirmishes that were occurring in northern part of Iraq, and so there were still concerns of terrorism, etc.
We'll get to your vocation in a minute,
Right.
but what was your work like day to day during that 13-month deployment to Iraq?
I would say that maybe I worked about 18, 19 hours a day, literally. I remember when I was in the advance party, and when the actual main body arrived, there was over 4,500 troops from my brigade, because we were supplemented with 2 additional battalions. When everyone took over their respective responsibilities, because I was basically being triple-hatted, maybe quadruple-hatted, I had some rest time, but still, as the intelligence officer, I still had to maintain situational awareness of what was going on the battlefield. And so therefore, I had to do a lot of IPB and a lot of preparation and briefing.
What's IPB?
Intelligence preparation of the battlefield, and also brief the brigade commander on all the situational updates. So it was very tedious, I must say, and so I would say 18, 19 hours a day. And I remember when all the other responsibilities were relieved from me, I thought it would be heaven, but it wasn't, But I ended up in the hospital because somebody found me in the sand. I had passed out from dehydration. And I guess I had gone so many days without really hydrating myself.
Yeah, desert climate sneaks up on you,
It
doesn't
sure
it?
does.
Dry, it's
Yeah.
very dry.
So I had a fun 5 days at the 5th MASH hospital.
Okay, wow. Yeah. Well, so you're in charge of collecting intelligence. Where is the intelligence coming from? I suppose you have, satellites and sources on the ground?
No, in military intelligence, it's a variety and diversity of disciplines that comprises military intelligence as a whole. And not getting into any details or classified versions, but it's if you look it up on the internet, you'll find all the answers. But basically, we have different disciplines. So my particular discipline, was at that time in Saudi Arabia was all source intelligence. So we were able to get intelligence from different sources, whether it be signals intelligence, whether it be counterintelligence, human intelligence, and just all the analysis from tactical intelligence that were being reported in. So some smart analysts will put all these things together, and then we were able to digest it and understand the situation on the battlefield.
I'm talking to Father Stephen Wong of the Archdiocese of Washington. Father Wong, a 40-year veteran of the U.S. Army, who spent a good bit of his career in counterintelligence, and we're talking about your experience during the first Gulf War. The war ended well for the United States, and
Yes.
and I'm sure you were ready to come home after those 13 months, yes?
Most definitely.
So where were you based at that time?
Fort Huachuca, Arizona. That's our home of military intelligence.
I see. Okay, so somewhere along the line, you started having an idea that you might want to become a priest, but you didn't take that step for another 20 years or more after that.
That's right. And it was necessary. It wasn't necessarily at that time. I remember my vocations first started maybe when I was 15 years old, when I went to a Jesuit high school. And then
that was in Jamaica?
That was in Jamaica, that's correct. And I had the initial call in it then, and but for some reason, because of the political situation that we're developing in Jamaica, things came to a halt. Then, we had to decide whether or not we stay in Jamaica or we had to leave. My family decided that it was safer if we left. So we left, and then that's where I found my predicament and where it was going to head off, and that's where the Army came in. And so for the 40 years, basically in the Army, I basically lived the secular life, Yes, I did at that time, wasn't as practicing. People would call me maybe a cafeteria Catholic, as they would say, because at that time I got so involved in my career, and the military was giving me a lot of, new challenges, advanced promotions, advanced responsibilities, and I was striving for all these like responsibilities that were given to me, and everything was so new, and I like new challenges. And so with these new challenges that were being pushed on me, it was like I was receiving rapid promotions, and I was so appreciative of great leaders growing up throughout my career in the Army, even until I left. I still keep in touch with a lot of my friends that are at Fort Huachuca that right now, even the general officers there. So it's quite I would say a blessing that I didn't realize at the time. But it wasn't until I was stationed in Korea, and that would have been 2016. That was my second time that I was in Korea, that really my conversion really started.
I see. Well, you adapted very well to the military. It's almost contemporaneous with your citizenship. You actually were in the military, before you became a
Most definitely. 5 years before I became a citizen. So I was a legal resident alien. And at the time, I think we still can enlist in the Army. And then at the time when I did that in 1979, it was normally waived to 3 years instead of the 5-year waiting time.
I see. Okay, so just to divert for a moment, you say your family came here to the United States in 1979. You have brothers and sisters. What did your dad do for a living? What was your family of origin like?
Right. I never had a father. That's, basically my mom had two children before I came along. And while she was pregnant with me, my father left. And then she basically worked on her own, and we lived with my grandmother, with my aunts and uncles. So there were 8 of us all together.
I see. So we're talking about Korea around about 2016, and that's when you started to really discern your vocation. Tell me how that came about.
Yeah, that's a really great story to tell, because I remember living my life really well, and occasionally I would go to church, maybe go to the chapel for Mass, maybe once a month, maybe once every 2 months. And then one Sunday I decided go to Mass. And there was a brand new priest assigned to Korea, and he was from the AMS as well, the Archdiocese Military Service.
A U.S. Army chaplain.
A U.S. Army chaplain. And he was brand new to Korea, brand new to the Army. So his homily really hit home. It hit it out of the ballpark. And so after Mass, I went up to him and said, "Chaplain, that was a really awesome homily that really resonated with me. So thank you for that." And long story short, we became really good friends.
Who was this chaplain?
I said, Father. So you would test my quick memory right now. Father Joe Campbell. And he's at Arlington right now.
Father Campbell, yes. Okay, so from that conversation, what happened next?
Well, we became friends for a year before he actually, he was, I don't know if he will remember this, but I remember one time during our talking, I told him it's been like 15 years since my confession. And then also, you know, he was very gentle in his approach. He didn't say, "What? It's been 15 years," you know? But he was very gentle in his approach, and we discussed quite a bit. And then one day he said to me, he's like, "Well, you know, if you continue living the way you are living, I don't think you're going to make it to heaven." And I think that was the comment that kind of like struck my heart to really, and it opened up my heart to kind of ask myself, well, am I a bad person, or is it, what does it mean? You know, why can't I make it to heaven? So it caused a lot of questions within me. And that was I guess the foot in the door that really got me to like feeling like how Saul must have felt when he was knocked off the horse, you know, and was blinded. Because then I started waking up at 3 o'clock in the morning, and I don't know why that happened, but I couldn't go back to bed. And that's where he said to me, "Why don't you start reading the Liturgy of the Hours?" And he showed me how to download it on my phone, the iBreviary, and I was able to do that. And it, you know, I read it every day, and I was very dedicated to doing that to see how that would change my life. And I was doing it for like 30 days, and nothing happened. It was just all words that I was reading. And then all of a sudden, I remember one morning after the first month, I started reading, and I think it was Psalm 86. And all of a sudden, I felt tears coming down my eyes. And I was like, wait a minute, what's going on here? I had no idea why tears were just originating from my eyes. And, you know, now that I look back, you know, it's definitely the work of the Holy Spirit. And it was really calling to me. And I think that's why God used, you know, Father Campbell as a means, an instrument to be able to say, okay, that's knock on the door again and say, okay, I've got my attention focused on you again.
And so by this time you were eligible for military retirement anyway, I suppose.
Interesting you should say that, because I was already retired from the Army. So I retired from the Army as a major, and then I came on the very next day as a civilian. And at the time that I'd met Father Joe, I was a GG-15, so you know the GS system. So
schedule.
Right, and I was the director of counterintelligence, human intelligence for the U.S. Army in South Korea, particularly 8th Army that is still operational there. And so that's where I met him, and I had a lot of responsibilities. And I remember laughing one time when he asked me, he said, "Would you come to the Bible study?" And I kind of looked at him as, not to be pompous or anything, but I looked at him and said, "Do you know who I am?" I mean, not to say, but I was more meaning my time. I just don't have the time because I was literally working 16 hours a day. And I remember all my officers that worked for me, I worked them till midnight almost every day. And when he was very, very skillful, he said, "Well, it looks like you go to the gym." I said, "Yeah." And he said, "How often?" I said, "Every day." And he said, "If you can go to the gym every day, why can't you spend 1 hour a week to get to know Jesus more?" And I said, "Well, you make a lot of sense." Then he said, "Well, I tell you what, let's make a deal. I'll go to the gym with you a couple of days, and then you, in turn, will come to Bible study." And I said, "That's a deal." So I went back to my department and I asked all my officers, I said, "How many of you would like to go to Bible study with me?" Nobody raised their hands. Then, you know, as calculating that I can be sometimes, I said to them, "Well, how many of you would like to go to Bible study and leave right after that?" The entire department raised their hands.
But none of them became priests.
Of course not. But then, you know, it brought them closer to Jesus, though.
And that's what it's all about.
Absolutely.
Now, you took those extra steps toward Jesus when you decided to enter the seminary. And you entered the seminary for the Archdiocese of Washington, D.C.
Absolutely.
How did you get connected to the Archdiocese of Washington?
You know, it was the Holy Spirit leading me. because when the biggest discernment process that I had to go through was, and I did almost 2 years of discernment when I first felt the call and tried to just figure out what was going on. And the biggest question that I had in my mind is that, God, is this what you want me to do? Do you want me to be a priest? Or is it me thinking that you want me to be a priest? And I had to really ask, and into a lot of prayers and a lot of getting to know Jesus through reading the Bible and sitting in front of the Blessed Sacrament for hours. I finally got my answer one day when I said, Lord, I need an answer, and I really need an answer today because I'm basically suffering if I'm not getting the answer. And I got that answer. Our Lord showed me that answer, and it was so illuminating. And it was that day that I surrendered.
And how did He show you?
Well, when I was in the chapel before Mass, I said, Lord, give me this sign. Please, I'm asking you for a sign. And I know I shouldn't be demanding this from you, but I'm so confused right now. I need your help. I went to Mass, and we had a visiting priest. I was in Belgium at this time, and the chaplain had arranged for somebody from Louvain to come in and substitute for him. And so, the gospel came from Matthew 26, and it says, once you have your hands in the plow, never look back. And I said, okay, that's too generic. And then the priest started giving his homily, and he was from Sudan, and he told me that, he told us that in his homily that when he was a teenager, his village was being butchered. And so he and his family and a couple neighbors had to run for their lives. And they went for 3 days until they reached the bordering country. And they entered a refugee camp. They saw 2 priests with open arms. And he said, as he was running towards the refugee camp, he said he felt the Lord saying, this is what you are destined for, to be a priest. And so he started pointing at the pews, and he started going around in circle. And he said, if any of you are being called by our Lord Jesus Christ, do not ignore him. And all of a sudden his finger stopped in front of me. And I was like, is he pointing at me? So I looked behind me, and then he said, no, don't turn around. I'm talking to you. and right after Mass was over, I went up to him when we had our fellowship, and I said, Father, why did you point at me? And he said, I don't know. I just stopped. And I said, well, do you know that the Lord used you to answer my question? Because I received the answer that I'm looking for. And it was at that moment I surrendered, and I said, yes, I will accept your will to become a priest.
Very interesting story. So then you had to apply to a seminary?
Yes, back to Washington, D.C., and the Holy Spirit led me there. So initially, I was told, go searching for a diocese that will sponsor you.
Okay, so you're in Belgium at this point.
Yes, I am.
And you encounter the priest from Sudan.
That's correct.
And who did you talk to next?
I talked to my chaplain, Father PJ. He's a American Filipino, but he was also with AMS. And he started.
AMS is the Archdiocese for the Military Services.
That's right. And he gave me the guidelines and what I needed to do, and he was walking me through the process. And it was really entertaining because he said, find a place you want to apply to. So at one point I was stationed in Monterey, California. I went through the Defensive Language Institute there. And I said, I really enjoyed being there, and I think the people really need priests there. So I emailed the director of vocations there, and I said, I'm interested. I think the Lord is really calling me to be a priest. And what are the procedures? So he said, send me your resume, send me your autobiography, and send me an essay of why you want to be a priest. So I gathered all those documentations together, and I sent it to him. And then, it was just like an inquiry. It wasn't an application. And so 3 weeks later, I got an answer back from him, beautiful email back. And it basically said, your diversity, your experience, all this that you bring to the table, you'll make a wonderful priest. But unfortunately, we have to say no because of your age. You're too old. And at the end, it would have been okay if he had just left it there. But at the end, he said, we're afraid that after you graduate and are ordained as a priest, you will have very limited utilization for us. I'm like, wow. And I showed this to the chaplain, and he got so mad. He started pounding his desk, and he said, please give me 24 hours. 24 hours. And so right after that, he called me and he said, please call the director of vocations for the Archdiocese of Washington, right? And here's this number, send him an email. And I spoke to Father Mark Ivany. Oh my goodness, that was like a godsend, because I started talking to him and I felt like I knew him from the very onset of our conversation. So we must have talked for about an hour, and it was just a rapid exchange of discussion. And he said, do you ever make it to DC? And I was like, do I ever? I said, every 3 months I come to DC because I have to go to the Pentagon, And he said, well, next time you're here, can you stop by and we can see each other face to face, right? So at the time he was like, are you sure you're 56? Because you don't sound like it. And when I finally met him, he's like, are you sure you're 56? Because you don't look 56.
Did you have to get a special dispensation for them to accept you into the seminary?
It's not a dispensation. It is what they probably said they're accepting an older vocation.
I see.
Right.
And where did you, a couple of quick questions. We're nearing the end of our time here. Did your mom raise you Catholic? Were you a cradle Catholic?
We were raised Catholic. I was born and baptized in Jamaica as Catholic, but none of my family ever really were practicing Catholic, even though we went to Catholic primary school and high school. But I was the only one that went to church in my family.
And you say during your early time in the Army, you went and got a college degree.
Yes.
Where was that?
That was, I first started off with Eastern Kentucky University, then in the night program, and then ended up with University of Maryland. And I got my degree in liberal arts and also business.
I see. And where did you go to seminary?
Went to seminary right here in Washington, D.C. At Theological College.
So we got a minute or two left. Looking back on all this, you're a priest now. You're wearing a Roman collar, sitting in front of me here. What a story! What do you make of this journey of yours?
That's a wonderful question, and every day I probably ask myself, Lord, what did you see in me to really call me to be one of your priests? And I feel blessed every day, and especially I'm mostly feeling blessed of being here in the Archdiocese of Washington, where there's so much need for priests to care for the flock, and I've gotten so much blessing out of that. And this Archdiocese is just like, it's been a godsend to me. So
I've been talking to Father Stephen Wong of the Archdiocese of Washington, a 40-year veteran of the United States Army, during which time he served as head of counterintelligence for NATO, among many other stations, most of which were in counterintelligence. And I suppose those skills you acquired along the way are serving you well in your priesthood.
I would say so, yes.
Thank you so much, Father Wong, for talking to me.
Thank you very much.
Catholic Military Life is a podcast of the Archdiocese for the Military Services USA, established by Pope St. John Paul II in 1985 to provide for the free exercise of Catholic faith in all branches of the U.S. military, the nation's VA medical centers, and the government's civilian workforce beyond U.S. borders. All told, 1.8 million American Catholics worldwide depend on the Archdiocese for the Military Services USA, its endorsed chaplains, and religious programs for pastoral care. Learn more at milarch.org, milarch.org, where you can access not only Catholic Military Life, but also the podcast We Hold These Treasures, as well as Salute Magazine, E-Tension, the monthly electronic newsletter, and other publications of interest to Catholic military families and those discerning a vocation. The Archdiocese for the Military Services USA, serving those who serve.